They laughed at her tattoo loud enough for the whole training yard to hear. She didn't flinch, but when the Marine colonel walked in, he went silent, took off his jacket, and showed them why their laughter would haunt them forever. The afternoon sun beat down on the training yard, turning the sand into a shimmering golden haze. A group of young recruits stood in loose formation, their chatter sharp and mocking. At the center of their attention was a quiet woman, crouched beside a gear crate, checking her weapon harness. On the back of her shoulder, visible under her short-sleeved uniform, was a small, faded tattoo, a simple black insignia. "Nice drawing," one recruit snickered. Another laughed. "Bet you got that at a souvenir shop." Their words carried, bouncing off the walls. She didn't answer. She never did. Her eyes stayed on the straps she was tightening, her movements precise, deliberate, immune to the sting of their voices. What they didn't see was the way her jaw set, not in anger but in discipline, not in defense but in memory. Her name was Staff Sergeant Alina Graves, though most here only knew her as Graves, the quiet one. To them, she was just another transfer from another base, nothing special. But her silence hid years of service far beyond what most of them could imagine. Years earlier, she had been part of a rapid deployment unit sent into territories no one spoke about openly. The missions were short in words but heavy in weight. She'd lost friends there, people who had laughed with her in the dirt one day, only to be names etched into memorial walls the next. That tattoo? It wasn't decoration. It was the emblem of a unit so classified most Marines would never even hear its name. It was inked on her skin the night after they completed their final operation. The night before everything went wrong. The laughter around her grew. Some of the recruits exchanged smug glances, emboldened by her silence. They didn't know that every word they threw at her was bouncing off armor they couldn't see, armor forged in fire, in loss, in the promise she'd made to her fallen brothers and sisters. The sergeant overseeing training glanced over, saw what was happening, and chose not to intervene. That was the way of some, letting the younger ones learn lessons on their own. But this wasn't a lesson. It was disrespect, sharpened into cruelty. Then, without warning, the yard's gate opened. The air seemed to shift as Colonel Marcus Hale stepped in. His presence was the kind that didn't need volume to demand attention. The man carried decades of service in the lines of his face, his stride unhurried yet purposeful. The recruits stiffened, all except the ones who were still smirking at Alina's back. The colonel's gaze landed on her tattoo. He froze mid-step. For a moment, his hardened expression faltered, replaced by something softer and heavier. Without a word, he shrugged off his jacket. On his right shoulder, in the same place as hers, was the identical insignia, black, simple, unyielding. The recruits' faces drained of color. "She wears it," he said finally, his voice calm but carrying enough weight to still the entire yard, "because she earned it. And if you knew what that meant, you wouldn't have dared to speak." Silence fell like a curtain. Alina didn't look at him, but her posture changed. Not in pride, she'd never sought that, but in quiet acknowledgement. For the first time since arriving, someone had seen her for who she truly was. "You think strength is in loud voices," the colonel continued, scanning the recruits, "but the strongest people I've ever known were the quietest in the room." The words hit harder than any drill command. No one moved. No one spoke. The rest of the day, no one mocked her again. Not because they feared her, but because they now understood, or at least sensed, that they were in the presence of someone who had carried burdens far heavier than their laughter. "She wears it because she earned it. The strongest people I've ever known were the quietest in the room." Her silence wasn't weakness, it was the language of the battlefield. Some marks are just ink. Others are earned in places and moments that words can never reach. Respect those who carry them, because behind each one lies a story you may never be ready to hear. Where are you watching from? Share in the comments. And subscribe to Still Tale for more untold stories of silent strength and unshakable courage.